As you may know, I have been very vocal in the last few weeks when it comes to the controversy surrounding people reintroducing carbohydrates back into their diets after being quote unquote long-term carnivore. Oftentimes it looks to be short-term carnivore in some way or another. They're all relative terms, so it depends on what you're referring to. But we've been giving a bunch of reasons as to why people could be having problems, because we don't deny that people could be having problems. But it's always nice to see um, actual personal anecdotes from people reinforcing what we've been saying. And I have one for you today from one of my viewers. His name is Earl. He's been in contact with me since the beginning, really. So let's go ahead and read something that he said about this. Been following your videos, especially those about carnivores quitting and they're bringing carbs back in, etc., and fasting blood glucose and HbA1c on carnivore. And it's really very interesting. And I really hope that more people would understand more what's happening instead of just taking those numbers as and when they see them. I have a CGM on now, and I've been also monitoring my blood sugar using a finger stick device just to align the values. And I've always been very curious about my blood sugar profile throughout the day after eating my usual food, what happens at night when I wake up, etc. Then I see that it was pretty flat actually, which is exactly what we've been saying actually about it being flat, and how therefore that's already the starting point as to the indication that this isn't actually necessarily a problem. So let's go further. My mean glucose is 5.2 millimoles per liter, so about 93.6 milligrams per deciliter. So yeah, it's in the lower 90s, but still, yep. Okay, so that's above average compared to what the normative range is, which have you believe is appropriate, right? And I think the highest that it went up to was 7.2, so 130 milligrams per deciliter. Okay, great. Which I think I kind of expected because the meal wasn't as clean, quote unquote, if you know what I mean. Okay, there we go. But if I stay mostly carnivore with my meals, it will still go up to 6.5 to 6.8, 117 to 123, stay for a while, and then go back to baseline in 3 hours. Okay, so that's exactly what you would expect to see. And I noticed that sometimes it doesn't go back to baseline as fast, and it stays slightly above 5.6, 100, for a good few hours. Then I'd go thinking, I have not eaten carbs at all. Why is it high? Now, I don't understand why people would introduce carbs to correct that, because I understand there's really more happening there. Right. So basically what he's saying is that it may not go back to baseline as fast. It may stay at about 100 milligrams per deciliter, but eventually it does go right back down, which, as we know, because of the influences of insulin and glucagon, having higher glucagon, having lower insulin on a carnivore, you're going to have more of a pressure, for more of a chemical pressure for glucose to be produced endogenously at the level of the liver, and less of the glucose leaving the bloodstream as a consequence of higher insulin. And so this is completely normal. Not to mention that even in a fasted state on a high carbohydrate diet, um, the glucose level may very well be lower than you would see on carnivore, because their ability to produce glucose endogenously as a result of them eating it exogenously all the time is going to be lower than in people like us that are not eating hardly any carbohydrates at all, and very, very seldom are we ever putting carbohydrates into our bodies exogenously. So he says, now I don't understand why people would introduce carbs to correct that, because I understand there's really more happening there. Yeah, this is because, okay, so I don't misrepresent arguments. I really, 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 I am as forgiving as possible here. So here's what their actual argument is. Their argument is that if your fasting blood glucose goes above that amount, that's bad because of excess glycation. How do carbohydrates sort of paradoxically fix that, assuming that that's a problem? The way that it does that is by stimulating insulin, decreasing glucagon, so insulin helps to bring glucose levels down. This is what Rob Siwes has said before. He said, okay, well, we need to increase insulin, decrease glucagon, because we're actually having too high of glucagon, too low of insulin. He calls it insulin suppression. And it prevents us from getting our blood glucose down into a safer level. So it can be sort of an ephemeral transient assistance in ameliorating diabetes, ameliorating obesity, all the fat gain, all the stuff that's associated with high levels of insulin. But over time, once you're long-term, whatever that really means, but for the sake of the argument, long-term, it will actually cause very similar issues and lead to heart disease and all that stuff. I did a video reaction to that, so I'll link that in the top right corner of the screen, because it is absolute nonsense. There's no evidence to support that claim, or any of these claims, actually. And the irony is that Rob Siwes was wearing an animal hat while doing the video, which wasn't in good taste. Whether he realized he was doing that or not, I mean, I don't know, but not really good optics. Also, not really good optics to also say in the same video that you are a fat guy, and saying that you're fat probably because of the carbs you're eating, and saying that that's a better alternative because at the end of the day, I'm still within range on my fasting blood glucose, my A1C, and whatever else he may have referenced, which is silly. So basically, you're staying fat by what you believe to be the cause of the extant carbohydrates in your diet, because you are within a certain blood range, with the implication, the assumption, the presumption that must be indicative necessarily of optimal health status, superior health status, compared to people that have higher levels of those markers. And also basically getting all of his information from ChatGPT. Because what happens is if you ask leading questions, ChatGPT is designed to make you want to. It's designed to affirm you in the best way possible, at least at the moment, and especially at the time of him recording that video and publishing it. So that is the argument at hand. And on the surface, it makes sense until you realize that, well, a fasting blood glucose that's slightly elevated beyond normative ranges isn't necessarily indicative of higher glycation rate, which is the entire reason we look at a fasting blood glucose anyway. Okay. And same thing with the HbA1c value. So this is reflected in the low insulin. First of all, if you had a toxic level of glucose in the blood, your insulin will go up to compensate for that. Okay, so there you go. Which is right around the 130 milligram per deciliter mark in people that have been studied. So above that amount, insulin is usually released beyond the basal level at that amount. And also it's reflected even more strongly in terms of the signal that's derived from fructosamine assays of these people. This is the rate of this is a marker that measures the rate of glycation, or the glycation status of your proteins in your blood plasma. So albumin, globulins, those are the two primary ones. And you'll see that they're quite low, very low, actually. And so that's a better indicator of actual glycation rate. And so just because you have a higher glycation, a higher fasting blood glucose, that doesn't mean that you're sustaining more glycation damage. It's just the case that the people that have been studied that exhibit levels that are approaching that level are not eating carnivore. They're eating a different diet. And this seems to be due to a phenomenon of insulin resistance, as we know. And I know that there's been a lot of talk. There's a lot of ambiguous language with respect to this phenomenon. Some people will say that it doesn't exist. I don't really think it's not true. It's not that it doesn't exist. It's that it's a construct. So it's not a direct measurement. And therefore, it's a concept. And also, it doesn't exist in the way that people in the mainstream say that it exists. Those are the problems. Insulin resistance itself as a phenomenon is absolutely true. It's real. It cannot be directly measured, but there's a lot of things that can't be directly measured. I mean, you can't even really prove your own existence scientifically. So, I mean, that you got to be careful with that, with making that claim. But observationally, it has been seen. I mean, this is why we measure. We look at a fasting insulin level, or at least we can, and it's a useful tool. So many of the people, I think that's really what they mean when they say that insulin resistance doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in the way that the mainstream will have you believe it exists. And since it's been so perverted and abused with the wrong connotations, perhaps there should be a different term to describe that phenomenon. That phenomenon being, just as a recap, a disproportionate level of insulin in response to a glucose level in the blood. So you need more and more insulin than would be expected. That would be, that's normally physiologically required, to bring a glucose level down. And this is ostensibly due to the fact that due to an increased hypertrophy of fat cells, because every cell has a maximum rate at which they can grow, obviously, as we know. And when a fat cell typically grows to that size, it will divide. It's hyperplasia, where you'll actually get a division of the number of fat cells, but you have a genotypic maximum in terms of how many more fat cells you can create. And that differs depending on the person because we all have different genotypes. And over time, since everything in the body is a fader, it seems that over time, as you get fatter and fatter and fatter, you can absolutely have more insulin be required to usher glucose in, because, well, whenever the glucose goes in, it's usually used to transmute into fat. So if the cells are getting bigger and bigger, it's like filling a room with more and more mass. Eventually, there's going to be the rate at which you can the rate at which you can administer more mass is going to slow down until eventually you can't put any more in. So I think that's why insulin resistance as a phenomenon is a real thing, but people will describe it as inundation-induced insensibility. What does that mean? People will say, oh, well, if you exhibit high levels of insulin, spike, drop, spike, drop, spike, drop, and higher basal levels, eventually your cells are desensitized to insulin. That's not how things work. There's no evidence to support that claim. That descriptor or description of insulin resistance is false. Or at least, again, you don't want to make an appeal to ignorance fallacy. Just because there's no evidence to support a claim doesn't mean that that claim is false. There is no evidence to support that claim. And so that's basically my position on this. Anyway, Earl goes on to say, I see a lot of discussions happening around this, and sometimes I join in, sometimes I skip. It kind of gets tiring discussing with people who refuse to update what they know, but thank you for sticking to what you're doing. You're helping me and a lot of others, I am sure. Well, I am glad to be of use and help, Earl, and to you if I've helped you in this regard. Yeah, I mean, look, you'll struggle, as I say routinely, you will struggle to find someone as objective as me in the space. There's very, very, very few of those people. It's difficult, and I say this in the least condescending and patronizing way as I can. It's not human nature, so I try and be forgiving to people that they sort of trend towards that bias. I was that person before. It would be a little sanctimonious of me to pretend like it would be inappropriate of me to pretend like I was never that person before. We all have been. And so whenever I saw these problems, I was like, okay, well, is this something that is true? Does it have any weight? And what I've done is I've said I understand the concern, absolutely, because of the common feelings that we have towards fasting blood glucose and the HbA1c value. Um, but there's a lot more nuance to the picture. What you want to do is anytime you hear a claim, you want to try desperately to disprove that claim so that you can test the integrity of it. But you also want to do the same thing to your positions, and that's what I was doing. And that's what I continue to do. And that's what I will do because that's my job. So you may wonder why carnivore isn't in my name on YouTube. It's because I'm not tied to a specific tribe. I'm not, and I never will be. I'll be tied to truth. So I operate within a certain arena. It's a certain niche, that being health, science, and diet, and all that stuff, nutrition. And within that space, I will pursue the truth. I will attempt to discover it through curiosity and appreciation of the universe. And through logic and reason, try and descry the truth. There you go. I mean, and be as responsible with my reporting of what we do know and what is observed as possible. So, anyway, with that being said, nice to see a little anecdote here to reinforce what we've been saying. That this isn't necessarily a problem. You know, people are having this issue, but they're feeling better than ever, and it's not necessarily an issue at all with the HbA1c value, the fasting blood glucose. Better indicators are fructosamine assay. If you want to look at your HbA1c value, get the fructosamine assay and a reticulocyte production rate. If you're looking at a fasting blood glucose level, do not use the ones that are snapshots in time. If you have the money, if you even care enough, purchase a subscription for a CGM for like 1 month, and then you can cancel it. That's something to consider as well. I know that can be a bit expensive for people, so I understand that as well. But also look at your fasting insulin. There's a lot of things. You make a composite sort of inference before basing opinions off of like 1 or 2 metrics, and understand what all of the variables are that influence those metrics as well. That's very important. So HbA1c value, it's not just influenced by rate of glycation. It's also influenced by the length of the lifespan of your red blood cells. And so if that confounder is not controlled for, then you cannot observe an HbA1c value in isolation and say that you have a problem and that you should introduce carbohydrates back in. I'm not going to be one to say, well, how stupid can you be by adding carbs back in to try and lower your HbA1c and fasting glucose? Because I do actually understand the paradox. A lot of things are counterintuitive. A lot of things that lead to flourishing in the world are counterintuitive, right? Things can be paradoxical while also being true. So I've already explained the logic. The logic is bring insulin up, you'll actually paradoxically get a decrease in fasting blood glucose. And that does seem to happen in people like Paul Saladino, who showed his blood work, and other people that, have also shown their blood work after reintroducing, in some cases, hundreds of grams of carbohydrates. But that is not indicative of them showing benefit with respect to glycation rate. So I hope that I've made my point very clear here in this video. I think I've done quite a good job of that with my previous videos. And also, honestly, I've been letting a lot of other coaches for the last few weeks do most of the talking on this. So Coach Stephen Thomas, Sarah Franklin, we've got Coach Richard Smith that was up on here. we've got more coming up. At this point, you've probably seen Dr. Jaquish giving his opinions on people quitting carnivore, not necessarily specifically emphasizing things about HbA1c and fasting glucose, but um, still, I'm getting different perspectives here. But anyway, I do believe that I've conveyed this quite thoroughly. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below about any questions that you may have. Leave a like, subscribe to me if you haven't already. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'm not really sure what you're doing. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below as well. Nope. Buy my book Contraindicated as well to learn more about the way I think, what my positions are, my story as well, how I actually arrived at carnivore in the first place, and all about that good stuff. And also, I've been doing a lot of promotion for our carnivore certification program, but you know what? And yes, if you haven't joined yet, refer to the link in the description below. Links in the description below about that. In fact, I'll link a video in the top right corner of the screen surrounding that. But you know what? I'm going to take a break for a minute. Have you ever wanted to meet me in person? Yes, seriously. Have you ever wanted to do that? Because if you want to do that, well, fortunately for you, it's your lucky day because there is an opportunity for you to be able to do this at the upcoming Meat Stock event next year, May 2nd through May 3rd in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. There is a deal for you to get tickets at a discount if you use code Contraindicated. I'll go ahead and link all this stuff in the description below as well. And I'll also link a little bit of a advertisement there for you, a little poster of this event. There's going to be a lot of big names, as you can see here. Michaela Peterson's going to be there, Sean Baker, Anthony Chafee, Dr. Kills is even going to be there. There's going to be even Callie Means. This is a big event. Alex Clark from, I think, Culture Apothecary. There's a pretty big names there. So I will be attending that. I'll be giving a presentation there, and I'm not going to tell you what that's about. Not quite yet. Stay tuned. But if you want to meet me in person and you want to, interact with me and see what I have to say, then go ahead and attend that event. If you don't look, if you don't attend the event, you're a vegan. You are a vegan. This is a big deal. So this is my first big event. Excited. So yeah, go ahead and sign up to get your tickets. And with that being said, I look forward to seeing you there. Again, don't be a vegan. Don't be a vegan. So join me next time when we're reacting to more nonsense online, when we're solving problems, when we're sharing anecdotes, when we're talking about the recent controversy, etc., etc. So till then,